very excited to welcome you tonight to our workshop, Wildlife Rehabilitation in New York City, which will be led by Michelle Ashkin. Though we are not able to meet in person, we want to acknowledge that Brooklyn Bridge Park is on unceded land, which was stolen at catastrophic human and environmental cost from the Munsee, Lenape, and Canarsie peoples. We keep these First Nations and their past, present, and future members in mind as leaders in our field and rightful owners of this land. Brooklyn Bridge Park Conservancy also wants to acknowledge our continued support of BIPOC and AAPI communities and acknowledge the continued challenges they face. We remain committed to providing equitable access to programming and partnering with organizations and individuals that do the same. Our webinar tonight is being streamed live to our YouTube channel, and a recording will remain up for later access. As we begin, please stay muted until the discussion and questions portion of the workshop, at which point you are welcome to participate via video and microphone. You can also utilize the chat box to ask our speaker questions at any point. Please take a moment to correct any errors in your Zoom name, add your gender pronouns in parentheses for when we do have this discussion. And a little bit about our speaker tonight. Michelle Ashkin is the co-director of education at the Wild Bird Fund, a nonprofit wildlife rehabilitation clinic located on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Her passion to protect wildlife has taken her on expeditions to Hawaii and Baja, and she has worked locally to study migratory shorebirds and bobcats in New Jersey. Her mission to inspire others to advocate for animals and the environment and has been the driving force behind her work. Michelle was a founding teacher at the High School for Environmental Studies, the first of its kind in New York, and later went on to become the founding principal at the Academy for Conservation and the Environment. Her interest in animal sentience has inspired her to delve into the science of animal minds and incorporate humane education into all of her curricula. Michelle holds a master's degree in education from New York University and a master's in conservation biology from Columbia University. She's a licensed New York State wildlife rehabilitator and advocates for animals through legislative change. And with that, Michelle, I'll turn it over to you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Michelle, and I'm going to talk to you tonight about the work that we do as wildlife rehabilitators in New York City, introduce you to some of the wildlife that surrounds us, whether you've seen it or not, and some of the problems that they face, and then what you can do to be a more active steward for the wildlife in our city. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. And I'd like to, okay, where is my, I'm sorry, I don't see my, I do not see my.
Do you see it down at the bottom, the green share screen?
Yeah, but I do not see my PowerPoint that I just had.
Oh.
Let me see. Oh goodness. Maybe that will, or maybe it'll come up there. No. Oh goodness. Let me try something else here. I'd like to, I'm going to exit the full screen. I'm going to try to find this. Here it is. So let me try sharing again. I'm very sorry, but I don't see it here. I don't know what to do. Do you have any suggestions what I should
We
do?
are seeing your desktop screen.
So can you see this now?
Yes.
Okay, fine. So good. Okay, I'm glad that I don't know what happened there. Okay, so here we go. I'm sorry for the glitch. Okay, so wildlife rehabilitation in New York City, saving lives of the animals in our midst. So what you see here is a picture of a little 3-week-old squirrel that was given to me or brought to me after a storm, and it fell out of its nest. And I'll talk more about those squirrels later. So what is wildlife rehabilitation? So wildlife rehab is a process. It's a process of rescuing the animals in need. And we rescue injured animals, sick animals, and orphaned animals. We relieve their pain and suffering to the extent possible when they are with us. We try very hard to restore them to full health and vitality. And that can take anywhere from a few days to a few months. And then we release them back into the wild. And it's very important for everybody to understand that the purpose of wildlife rehabilitation is to release. It's rescue, rehab, and release. We want to get those animals back into the wild. So what can rehabbers do and what do we do? Well, as I just said, we rescue, we rehab, and we release. So we are licensed by the state of New York, and there are different kinds of licenses. And if you are federally licensed, you can handle endangered species and certain kinds of migratory birds. Otherwise, you cannot. You have to go for that second license. You have to be knowledgeable. You really have to understand the nature of the animals that you're going to treat, what their natural history is, what their nutritional needs are, what behavioral signs you're looking for to determine what could be wrong with them. And you have to be equipped. You have to have a place to keep them. You have to have the proper medications and the proper caging. And you have to know what to do and when to be able to release them. So we get a lot of animals that get injuries, like this little squirrel here who is bleeding. But again, you have to make sure that you know what to do and have the right kind of environment for them. And when they're ready to be released, we do what's called a soft release. And what a soft release is it's a preparation so the animals can acclimate to an outdoor life, because they may, if you've had them since they're babies, they may not know how to get food. They may not understand what it is to be outside. If they're adults, same thing. They may know what it's like to be outside, but you want to acclimate them to the area so that they know where to find food. They know they can sort of scout out their territory, maybe build their nest if it's time for them to do that. So that's what wild rehabbers do. So people ask me all the time, why does New York City need wildlife rehabilitation? And the answer to that is we have a lot of wildlife. And as you can see here, this little guy here is a New Yorker, and let's meet some of our other New York friends. So there is a wide diversity of little mammals in New York City. Obviously, you've all seen squirrels. Maybe if you're lucky enough, you've seen opossums alive and well. If you have gone to some of the parks in more northern Manhattan or in Brooklyn, and sometimes in Queens, you'll see plenty of little chipmunks. We actually have beavers in New York, not very many, but several have been spotted. We got a woodchuck a few months ago at the Wild Bird Fund that had been injured. And we now have little cottontail rabbits back. I think there was one spotted in Manhattan. We certainly have them in Staten Island and Brooklyn and most probably the Bronx. And they're called cottontails because they have this little cottontail. It's not really cotton, obviously, but we call it cottontail because it looks like a puff of cotton. So these are some of the smaller mammals that we have, sorry. We also have raccoons. And we do have fox, we have skunk, and we have bats. The reason I put these on a separate slide is because these beautiful, wonderful animals all are what are called rabies vector species. And what that means is that of all the mammals that I just showed you, these would be the more likely to have rabies. Doesn't mean they do. It just means they would be more likely. They would be more likely to have them because they might, like, for example, a bat might contract it from a rabid raccoon or so on and so forth. They don't just have it, they have to get it from someplace. So while we would like to be able to take care of these animals, unfortunately, if you find a raccoon in New York City, it is the law that that animal has to be destroyed, whether we know it has rabies or not, because the only way to know if an animal has rabies is to look at its brain tissue. And the only way you can do that is if it is no longer alive. If you do find a bat, you have to be careful not to touch it, or you call a rehabber right away and they will let you know what you need to do. There are some people who are rabies vector, they're licensed, and we can take them to those people. But if you touch a bat, then that bat has to be destroyed, or we have to wait until it goes through the process of finding out whether it has rabies, and you have to get rabies shots. So if you don't touch the bat, you know, you don't have to worry about getting the disease, obviously, but we warn people all the time, do not touch these animals. If you find any of them that are in distress, you absolutely must call a wildlife rehabber for instructions as to what to do. Now, we also have coyotes, and coyotes are, there are a few in Central Park in the past few years. We have coyotes in the Bronx. I think we had one in Central Park not too long ago, but I'd have to actually check on whether or not it's still there. And there is something called the Coyote Project that is run by volunteers. They are scientists who are collecting data on coyotes. They want to know where they are. They want to know how they're spreading. They want to know what their routes are, how they're moving into the different burrows. They want to study their feeding habitats, eating habits, and what they're depending on, and so on. They work with a lot of school kids, high school age students, not to work with the coyotes in person, but they set what are called camera traps. They put these camera traps, which are not traps, they're just they're cameras, and you put them on trees, and they can detect the warmth of the body, the infrared. They're infrared cameras, and they can see whether or not an animal is passing because they detect the infrared heat that the animal lets off, and then it takes a picture and a snapshot. And so they have the students do that, and if you're interested in something like this, I would encourage you to contact them because they might be looking for volunteers in your area. We also have a lot of deer. Staten Island has a large population of deer. This one here is a beautiful, handsome buck, and here's a doe with her baby. Deer can swim. Not too long ago, a deer was found in Brooklyn and was actually returned to Staten Island. It was believed that the deer swam over to Brooklyn. Now, let's not forget our reptiles. We have lots of reptiles in the 5 boroughs. This is, I believe, a snapping turtle, and we have other kinds of turtles. We also have a variety of snakes. So they do get injured, and they can be rehabbed, and they should be. And the birds. So as you know, I work for the Wild Bird Fund, and we do take in a lot of these small mammals, but mostly we take in birds. And as a rehabber, I do take in small mammals, but the only birds that I'm allowed to take in, because I am not federally licensed, I am state licensed, I can take in here the pigeon, and I can take in a starling, and I can take in a sparrow. But all of the other birds that you see here, even though they're relatively common, they are common to New York. You've probably seen robins, and this is a female cardinal and a beautiful male cardinal and a blue jay. But all these other birds, aside from these 3 here, have to be taken. They can be triaged overnight by a rehabber, but they have to be brought to a federally licensed rehab center like the Wild Bird Fund. We also have more elusive birds that we don't see quite as often. Many of you recognize the red-tailed hawk, named so for its magnificent, beautiful tail. These are red-tailed babies, not quite fledglings yet. They are by Central Park. If you have gone to Central Park, you would actually be able to see they set up a there's a telescope set up there, and you can see, and it's pointed right at the nest, at this nest, and you can see that nest there. It's used every single year. We have peregrine falcons, we have screech owls, we have other species of owls, we have long-eared owls and barred owls and great horned owls. We never see them unless you're out looking for owls. And we have a number of different kinds of woodpeckers. This one is called the yellow-bellied sapsucker. It happens to be in a rehab, most likely the Wild Bird Fund, because it must have been injured from something that it either ate or maybe it flew into a window. So why do we get so many birds in New York? We get up to 355 species here. And very quickly, for those of you who don't know, bird migratory routes take them very far north and very far south, and they migrate twice a year. They migrate in the fall before the winter is coming, so that they can follow the food source, because the food for many of the insectivores and nectar eating birds is going to dry up. And so they need to be able to follow that food source. They fly along these routes that are called flyways for obvious reasons. And there are 4 different flyways across the United States. And the flyway where New York is located is the Atlantic Flyway. And we get all these birds flying back and forth twice a year. And they stop off. And one of the reasons they stop off in New York, and one of the reasons that there are so many different mammal species that I just pointed out to you, is because, believe it or not, New York City, with all the 5 boroughs, is basically is about 25% green, and it's got a very high diversity of habitat. Habitat is, the kind of environment that an animal or a plant would be living in. And so in New York City, we will find woodlands. We will find rivers. This is the Hudson River. We will find wetland areas, swampy areas. We find coastal areas, and we have, freshwater. So these are all very suitable habitats for the diverse number of species and all 355 birds that visit our city. And what's so fascinating, quite frankly, is that in our parks, and particularly in Central Park, many of these habitats are present in Central Park. So when you think about Central Park, you think maybe the ball fields, you think maybe the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and the beautiful pine forest there. You think maybe about some of the more local places where you might visit. But in the North Woods, if you've ever been in the North Woods of Central Park, it's like walking in a path in Vermont. It's absolutely gorgeous, very woodsy, lot of different water sources. This is actually the pond by 59th Street. And so Central Park has many different habitats, and a lot of the birds that come through the city during migration find these habitats in Central Park very appealing. So very sadly, as you might imagine, even though New York City has many wonderful habitats and so much wildlife, it is a city, and it is inhabited by humans. And as such, there are many dangers and challenges that face wildlife when they come through our city. They are, maybe you don't think about it all the time, except when you are in rehab, you do think about it all the time, because you're always watching out for injured animals. We have made our Hudson and East Rivers beautiful for us to live by, and the beautiful promenades, except what we've done in doing so is we've gotten rid of all of the natural wetland areas, and instead we have like this wall here that goes all the way up the Hudson River and the East River as well. So when you get waterfowl, and we have a lot of waterfowl, we have geese and we have ducks, When they come here, they need those wetlands to be able to lay their nests in a safe place, and then to be able to take their ducklings or their goslings into the water immediately. But they also need a place to take them at night or to roost. And ducklings, little ducklings, while they can swim almost immediately within a couple of days of being hatched, they do need to stay dry because they do not have naturally the natural oils that they have from their oil gland are not yet matured, and so they cannot stay long in the water, otherwise they will die from hypothermia. So we have a lot of habitat destruction that we made to make way for human habitation. Clearly, we have a plastics problem. It's great that we have finally banned plastic bags, but it's not just plastic bags. Balloons, plastic trinkets, all kinds of plastic things litter our beaches. They end up in our water. They end up in birds' nests. They end up in the bodies of our birds. And if they don't end up as larger pieces of plastic, they disintegrate into microplastics. Microplastics are tiny pieces of plastic, and they also end up in birds' bodies. And these animals fill up on these plastic pieces, and they cannot get rid of them. And unfortunately, many of them die. One of the biggest problems for birds in particular are windows, because they hit windows, and we will talk about that soon in a little bit. Glue traps, people use them thinking that they'll just capture rats or mice, which is pretty cruel, no matter what the animal is. But they also capture birds and squirrels and other little animals that happen to be crawling around. So they are a big danger to wildlife. And so is rat poison. Rat poison is particularly dangerous. Well, it's dangerous to every living creature. So whether your dog thinks it's fun to eat, maybe it tastes good and your dog could taste it, your squirrels will get to it, cats can eat rat poison. And lots of raptors end up getting sick, and many die from eating rat poison, not because they eat it directly, but because they eat the animals that eat the rat poison. So if you have a rat that's had rat poison and it's staggering around because it doesn't feel well, a hawk or an owl will see that. They'll think it's an easy meal. They'll go get it, and within a few or two, they will be very sick. And if they are not taken immediately to get treatment, they will perish as well. So as I mentioned, glass for birds is one of the most dangerous challenges that birds have in cities all over the world, but in New York, it's a tremendous problem. We love our windows. The reason is quite evident. When windows reflect trees, birds don't see the window. They see the reflection, and they fly right into that reflection, and they hit the windows. They fall down. Many of them break their wings. They may break a leg. They may get a concussion. They may chip their beak. They may damage their eye. Any of these things, and all of them, happen to the birds as they come through New York City. This hawk was found in New York. It had eaten as I mentioned, it had I think it had eaten a pigeon. Either it ate a pigeon or a rat. I don't know which one it was, and it perished, unfortunately. I had the misfortune of seeing that happen to a hawk that I was watching. And it got sick the next day, and it died, and it ended up that it was rat poison that killed that hawk as well. So we really have to try to get our city to do something else other than putting out all this rat poison, because it does kill a lot of the animals that are very dear to us. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the Wild Bird Fund, because if you should find any injured animal, particularly birds, but mammals as well, you should be familiar with where to bring it and what to do. And the Wild Bird Fund is the only wildlife clinic in New York City, and they're open 7 days a week from 8 o'clock in the morning. And during COVID time, they close at 6, but they used to be open to 8 till 8 o'clock at night, and I'm sure they will return to those hours when they can. This is a little bird that called a northern Perula. I cannot tell you how many of these I have found where I live in Battery Park City after they have struck windows. This little bird has a concussion. How can you tell it has a concussion? Sorry, its little eyes are closed, it's puffed up, it clearly doesn't feel well. If you see a bird like this, you know it's not well. You can very gently take it, put it in a little bag, and you bring it right up to the Wild Bird Fund. Or you can call a rehabber like myself and we can help, or help to get it transferred. This is another bird, another migratory bird called a scarlet tanager. Again, this one was ready for release, but it had a severe concussion and it is on its way, hopefully, to freedom. This is a long-eared owl, and this animal also suffered from a concussion and it had an eye injury. Thankfully, it was not too damaged and it was able to leave relatively quickly, but he was lucky. And we get many ducks that migrate through the city as well. This is a wood duck, and as you can see, the wood duck had a broken wing from colliding with a window, and he also had a chipped beak. So it's really a problem for our animals, our birds. In this particular situation, we had a swan who swallowed a hawk. Now, the Wild Bird Fund takes these animals, and if we work with every rehabber works with veterinarians. And so this animal had to go for surgery and it had to be surgically removed. This is a recent owl that was found, and he is called a barred owl. And he was emaciated and quite sick, and he wasn't able to eat. He was barely able to move, but after treatment, he is recovering nicely. And this is what a barred owl should look like. Barred owls are beautiful animals. They're proud. They stand upright. They're beautifully feathered, bright-eyed, and alert. And you might have seen these little mallard ducklings. We have them in Central Park. We have them in where I live in Battery Park City. You might see them in the Hudson. You might see them in the East River. You certainly would see them in Prospect Park and other areas where there are lakes. These particular guys lost their mother, and so they had to be rehabbed. And so it's very important that people understand that they are not pets and they cannot be taken into a home. They need a very special diet. They need very special pellets that are intended for young wild ducklings because they have very particular nutritional needs. And even the younger ducklings like this will get a special food like you would give a puppy. Puppy chow, you wouldn't give it adult dog food because the nutritional needs of a young animal are different than the nutritional needs of the adult animal. And these little guys found themselves without a mother because the mother was actually attacked and killed in Central Park by a turtle. Snapping turtles, and even the red sliders, red-eared sliders that you might see, they do attack birds. And unfortunately, that mother was killed. So these animals had to be raised by rehabbers and eventually released. So another challenge that we as wildlife rehabbers face is helping animals that really don't need to be helped. And the reason that happens is because people, well-intentioned and compassionate people who love animals, sometimes mistakenly take animals that are not in need of help. So for example, you might see these little guys, and if you've never seen baby pigeons, these are what baby pigeons look like. This the first day they're born, they're hatched, their eyes are closed, they've got a little egg tooth to get out of the egg, and they're covered with this yellow down. Now, if you were to see animals like this on the ground, clearly you should know that these belong in the nest. And if you can find the nest and return it, it's so interesting to know that the myth that I learned when I was a child, which is a long time ago now, that birds have a sense of that because birds or other animals will not go back to their babies if there is human smell on it. That is not the case with birds, and it's not the case with squirrels either. So if you find baby birds and you see a nest, you should put them back because if they are not injured. If they are injured, it's a different story. If they're injured, then you need to take them to a rehabber. But if they are not injured, they are not bleeding, and they seem to be okay, you can put them back into the nest. But if you were to have seen a bird like this is a little kestrel. if you were to have seen a bird like, I'm thinking that might be a peregrine and not a kestrel. I think that's a little peregrine. Um, if you were to have seen a bird like this, you'd say, "Oh my God, it's such a young bird. Where are its parents? It's an orphan." And actually, you would be kidnapping that bird, because even when birds look like they're young, if they're fully feathered the way this is, even if they're not ready to fly, their parents are watching. Their parents are feeding, unless they're dead. And the reason is, birds, when their nest, they begin to flutter around. Sometimes they flutter and they leave the nest a little bit too early. Sometimes they flutter just at the right time, but they're not ready to fly, and they will be on the ground. And the parent, is a completely natural thing, and the parent is taking care of them and watching them from a distance. Um, if you were to have seen a little bunny like this, you would think, "Look at the size of that thing. It fits into the palm of my hand." However, its eyes are open, its ears are erect, it's fully furred. This little guy is independent. This little guy no longer needs its mom. And so we sometimes get rabbits that are fully healthy, not injured, and completely independent, and people just mistake them thinking that they need help. Here's a case where you have a squirrel, which we get many of throughout the year, not throughout the year. We get them in the fall and in the spring, because squirrels have 2 times a year when they give birth. The season is coming up right now, and many times they will fall from the nest. Now, if a squirrel falls from a nest, the inclination is to take it and save it. But the best thing to do, if it is not injured, is to return it to the nest. However, since the nests are usually pretty high, that's pretty difficult to do. And so I'll tell you in just a little bit what you're supposed to do if you find a baby squirrel. So knowing the animals that live in the city or in your neighborhood, and having an idea about what they look like when they're young, what they look like when they need to be with their mom, and what they look like when they're ready to be independent, will be very helpful for those of us who want to save, those of you who want to save wildlife, because you'll end up leaving the animals that need to be left there, and taking only those that really need help. Again, this is a little robin, and it's very young, right? So you might see this, and you might see it on the floor, hopping on the ground, hopping around, but it is fully feathered, and her eyes are open, and her mom knows she's there. Her mom has invested months building the nest, laying the eggs, laying on them, incubating those eggs, raising those chicks. She's not going to suddenly abandon her chick after expending so much energy to raise her babies. They're excellent mothers, and what you really should be doing is stopping to see, is the mother around? I'll talk to you a little bit more about that in a moment. And here, many of us don't realize that squirrels move their babies, and they actually often have more than one nest, which makes sense, because if something happens to one nest, they need to be able to bring their babies someplace else. What happens to nests? Well, trees are down during storms, or nests get blown out of trees when there are, really heavy winds, and if the nest was old, or if it wasn't secured properly. Or the mother just might not think that it's a good place right now, because there are predators around. So mother squirrels like this one literally them. So oftentimes they cannot move them all at once. So oftentimes, if the baby's fallen, they will move them to the new nest. So we ask, as rehabbers, please do not play rehabber. It's really important that you call somebody who is able to take care of them. We ask you to please, if you find an animal and it is injured, or you really do believe it's orphaned and you do take it, please do not feed it. And please do not provide water, which is completely against what you think you would want to do. And the reason for that is because you could do more harm than good. When baby squirrels, they dehydrate so quickly that if you try to give it water, you can actually cause it organ damage. They have to be hydrated in a very particular way. And if you give water or food to an animal that is cold. Let's say its body has cooled off because it's injured or sick, or it's not covered properly with fur or feathers. If you try to give it any kind of food or water and it's cold to the touch, it cannot possibly, its organs will not work. And again, you can do more damage than not. And we also ask you as rehabbers to please never keep wildlife. It is inhumane and it is illegal. So I want to give you some resources here. This is a little squirrel who came into my home, my rehab area, and he was orphaned because his mother was killed. But if he weren't orphaned, that picture just says it all. Like, where is my mom? They don't want to come to us any more than we want to have to take them in. So if you do see a squirrel, I would suggest that you go, and you should probably do this, you know, if you're interested in saving these animals and helping, you might want to go there before you actually see one, because it would give you the instructions. But you would go to urbanutopiawildlife.org, reunite, and you can see the instructions on how to reunite. If you're uncomfortable or you don't have the time and you just want to reach somebody, I have numbers for you to call at the end of this, where you can reach a person directly and we will be able to help you. The big thing is that people wait. They wait too long, they take it in, the animals get sick. And so when you find an animal, don't wait. If you have to take it in for whatever reason, call a rehabber right away. And really always try to reunite with mom. So we will send these resources to you, but you might want to take a screenshot of this page if you have a photograph of this page. If you find animals, the best thing to do, if you can, is to bring them to the only wildlife clinic, which is the Wild Bird Fund. And they are on Columbus Avenue on the west side of Manhattan, and they're located between 87th and 88th Street. And you can go to their website, wildbirdfund.org. You get all the information about their time and everything else there. And they have they have a lot of pictures that you can look at. You can learn a lot from just looking at their site. And I would highly recommend that you do that. If you cannot bring it to the wildlife clinic, you don't live anywhere near there, or you don't have transportation, or you just need help and you can't get there for whatever reason. In Manhattan, you can call me. This is my personal phone number. I get calls starting now all the way through the end of November. And if you live in Brooklyn, this is the number of a rehabber who you can reach in Brooklyn, and she will be able to help you with that as well. Many rehabbers that are on the DEC list, which is here. The DEC is the Department of Environmental Conservation, and they have a New York State Department of Conservation rehabbers list. So if you're in New York, didn't mean to do that. If you are in New York City, you can either do the Wild Bird Fund or you can call rehabbers. These are the numbers. If you're out, there are other rehabbers as well, by the way, in New York City. But I know that I always answer my phone, and I know that the Brooklyn rehabber always answers or returns the phone calls really quickly. If you are out of New York City, let's say you're up in Westchester, or you're in, upstate someplace, and you find an injured animal when you're on a hike or on the road, then you could go to this website and you can search for a rehabber that is in that area. You would go to the county. Let's say you're in Westchester County. You would go to Westchester County, and if you found, and then you would put what kind of animal it is, because different rehabbers take care of different animals. So if people are bird rehabbers exclusively, and you find an injured woodchuck or an injured flying squirrel, they may not be able to really help, not because they don't want to, but because that's not their area of expertise. So when you go on this website, you see what areas people are in, you see the counties that they're in, you see it also lists the kinds of animals that they take care of. Or you could go to this very excellent website, www.animalhelpnow, now. Again, I encourage you to look at these beforehand so you get a sense of these websites. So here are just some of the resources that are available to you. And there are lots of things that you can do. Really quickly, let me go over this with you. Bird strikes, especially during migration season, are so horrific that if you can find it in your heart to put up any kind of a window decal, there are so many different kinds. If you don't mind having them on your windows during the months when the birds are flying through, some of them are actually transparent, but they are actually, they're visible, they're made from some sort of a material which reflects ultraviolet rays, and the birds can actually see the reflection of ultraviolet rays, even though we as humans cannot. And so you can get those kinds of UV decals, which are actually very pretty. Birds see them, you don't. Or you can just put up any kind of design, or there are lots of different other things that you can use to, you can pull your blinds down, or you can, there are certain kinds of strings that you can hang, which are really actually quite pretty. You can go to, I'll send this resource to you as well, so you have more information about the decals and what other things you can do on your windows. Plastic bags are so bad for our animals. Balloons are a biggie. If you have to use balloons because, many children just love the balloons. If you are stuck on using a balloon, please make sure not to let it go. Because when you let the balloons go, they, they eventually deflate. They fall into the river or they fall into a tree. Most of the balloons that we use have long strings. Animals get caught in them. It's really, it's very dangerous for them. And any kind of plastic beads, as I mentioned to you before, they end up in the stomachs of animals. As I mentioned to you, glue traps are very inhumane, and there are different kinds of traps that you can use if you do not, if you have the problem with rodents. I would encourage you to look up humane traps. There are many that exist. Rat poison, the same thing. If we are careful about how we dispose of our garbage, if we can get the city and our neighborhoods to put up rat-proof garbage bags and garbage pails, which we have, if we don't leave our food all over the place, we will reduce the number of rats, and poison will really not be necessary. We also have, there are actually sounds that sonic waves sound waves that repel rats, and they don't bother other animals, and they repel mice as well. So if you have mice that tend to get into the house sometimes, if you have one of these sonic rat and mice repellents, all you have to do is turn it on. They don't bother cats and dogs or us, but they will bother rats and mice, and they will not enter your house. One of the things we really, really need as rehabbers, even if you are not a rehabber, is we need transporters. We need people to be able to take animals from one rehabber to another if necessary. So that's something that you can do. We all do different kinds of wildlife programs. Wild Bird Fund, who I work for as an education director, we go to the schools. And so if you're interested and think that it's something you'd like to help your child's school do, you can help them fundraise, or you can introduce the program or talk to the principal about the program. Say you really like the kids to learn about wildlife and humane education in their school. One of the things that you can do as well is to create a wildlife friendly garden. And it's very easy to do, and it's wonderful, and it's extremely calming and beautiful and good for our wildlife. I'd say that if none of those other things are things that you can do or want to do, please keep the numbers handy that you have, that I have provided for you, and will send again. This way, if you're walking down the street and you're in front of Bloomingdale's and you see, you see an injured bird, you'll go into your phone, you'll go to rehabber, you'll know exactly who to call, and someone will be able to help. And it will help if you also know how to rescue an injured animal. What do? You're the only one there. Nobody can get to it. You don't know what to do. Well, you're that animal's hero at that moment. So if you can figure out, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment, you'll be able to save lives yourself. And boy, will you feel good about it, because there's nothing better than saving a little life and knowing that you've helped in that way. And keep your eyes out for wildlife and know the needs, know the signs of animals in distress. I will send you these two flyers. They're very helpful. This one is step by step what to do if you find a baby bird, how to identify whether it's a nestling or a fledgling, whether it belongs in the nest or whether the mother's feeding it, what kinds of things to look for if it's injured, and so on. Same thing here. I found a sick, injured, or bird. What do I do? Here are the do's and don'ts. We'll send these to you. Please look at them. Share them with your neighbors, share them with your children, share them with your friends, because I've never met anybody who doesn't want to help an injured animal. And like I said, it's one of the most wonderful and fulfilling things that you can do. And I think that's it. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'll take any questions that you might have.
Sorry. Thanks, Michelle, for that really, really informative talk. I especially appreciated those, top 10 things you can do. I think that it's important that we realize, even if we are not rehabilitators ourselves, there are small things we can do in our everyday lives to help alleviate some of these problems that are happening here. So we're going to move into a brief question and answer portion. Thank you to those of you that have shared questions already. Feel free to type more of them into the chat box, and I will ask them to Michelle. We also surely encourage you, if you want to just turn your camera and video on and ask your question directly to Michelle, you can do that as well. Just keep in mind that we are streaming live on YouTube. And I think we're going to start it off with a question from Jane, which is, have you ever encountered any ill or damaged sea mammals?
No, I haven't.
So that's that.
Well, what's the question about that? So where did she go?
I'm here.
So I haven't personally. So is your question, what would you do if you found one?
Yeah, I think so. I think she was just wondering if you have experienced that at all.
No, I have not found any injured mammals. I have found injured sea birds, but not mammals. And I really like that you asked that question, because quite frankly, I'm not sure who we would call. And so I want to find that out, and I will find that out, and I will get that information to you, Christina, so that you can send that out to people, because we actually do have mammals that are coming back more frequently into our waters here. And it might be the Coast Guard. I'm not 100% sure. So let me find that out and get back to you on that.
So one organization that I know of and has actually worked with us in the past with a beached sea turtle that showed up at the park is the Atlantic Marine Conservation Society. I don't know. I think that they do take in some mammals in addition to sea turtles. But you're absolutely right. That's something we need to make sure that we have people around our island city here that can take care of those things. We just saw those amazing dolphins up by Green Point yesterday, and we want to make sure that we're not only creating a healthy environment for them, but we're there to help them if they need it. I have kind of a follow-up question to that. Thinking in mind that there's some differences between how you would rehab these different animal groups. Are there certain rehabbers that focus specifically on certain animals? Or I know you mentioned that there's a difference between the birds that you can rescue depending on whether you have a federal versus state license. Are there different levels of the license that allow you to take care of certain animals?
Yes, but in New York City, it's really, we don't have bears here, right? And we don't have these larger, these larger mammals. So if you're looking for bear, if you want to help an injured bear, you have to have their special permits. What I will say is that I think I mentioned this earlier, is
Sorry.
different rehabbers specialize in different kinds of animals. So certain rehabbers only want to take in squirrels. Some only want to do opossums. Some only want to do rabbits. Some want to do all, but only have expertise in one area. So we tend to network as rehabbers. One of the things that we tend to do is we network with one another. So for example, if you called me and you say, you know, I have a baby, I have a rabbit, I don't know what to do with it. I could take it, I could certainly help. I don't have the expertise. I would call upon my my network of people and say, okay, I have this rabbit. Either I would try to get it to somebody who has had much more experience with rabbits, or I would talk to them and say, okay, walk me through this. What do I need to do? What do I need to have? So on and so forth. So, but that's why if you go on the DEC website, which I don't expect you to do, you know, unless you have to actually, but that's why they list the animals that people specialize in so that you don't waste your time calling the wrong people.
Great.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, definitely. There was another question about how many rehabilitators do we have here in New York City? Since it sounds like you guys are all a network and communicate, does that mean you kind of pretty much all know each other?
Well, that's also a good question. So we do have a lot of people who are on the list of rehabbers in New York City. They don't always answer their phones, and they don't always answer their emails, and they're not always active rehabbers, which is why I give you the two numbers that I gave you, because, and some people aren't even on a list because they don't want the phone calls. And one of them, and so there aren't quite a few, right? So in terms of, I would say the active people who I network with most in New York, I'd say there are 5 of us, which is not a lot. But then there's, of course, the Wild Bird Fund, which takes in just about everything except for, you know, the larger mammals. So if you find squirrels or you find opossums and you bring them to the Wild Bird Fund, one of the reasons I highly recommend you bringing to a clinic is because they will look at the animal, they will assess it, they will see what the injuries are, they will determine whether or not that animal needs to go to a veterinarian for particular care. They will, you know, they will get the x-rays done. Once they've assessed what the situation is, they can call upon me, they can call upon other rehabbers and say, okay, you know, we need your help. So that's one of the things that we like to do. But there are not that many of us, although there are many people on the list. So it's a difference between being having the license and then really being an active rehabber. And we are continually growing our network. And I really encourage you, if you're interested, to take the rehabbers test, which is coming up in April and then again in August. And you get study guides and you learn all about this stuff. You take the test and then you start to work with someone and you develop the skills and you too can do the work. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Interestingly enough, we did have someone right in the chat box. John says, I applied to take the New York State license exam for wildlife rehabilitation. The state offers a PDF for practice exam and study guide. Do you recommend any books that are a go-to for you?
I think for you, for taking that test, go strictly by the study guide. It's great. You'll get everything that you need to know. The way I did it years ago when I took it, it was four years ago, I think. I studied the study guide. I studied it twice. I did all the questions on the tests that I got. And just, you know, it sort of came naturally to me. I knew a lot anyway, but that's what I would do. Of course, you can, I can't think of, there are certain books that you can look at. I can probably post those for you as well. But I think for the purposes of getting the license and passing the test, you should do fine if you just study the work that they give you, because a lot of the questions they're just sort of recycled questions. So if you get the questions on the study guide, the test questions, you'll see a lot of those same questions. If you have any trouble with the math, because there aren't that many, I freaked out a little bit. I was like, oh my God, I'm so bad with math. How am I going to figure out all these formulas? It's really not that tricky. And I'd be happy to help you if you need any help. So you can always give me a call too.
Great inside tip there. All right, we're going to move back to some more animal-specific questions. Where do animals get released, and what happens to wildlife that cannot be released?
Okay, I'm going to answer the second part of that first. If wildlife cannot be released, it is a very sad day for all of us because we have no choice but to euthanize. Now, I don't want that to prevent you from taking an animal into rehabilitation, into a rehabilitator. The reason that we do not keep them alive, we could. I mean, there are many injuries where we could keep an animal alive, but if the animal can't fly, if it can't see properly and can't get its own food, if it limps, if it can't climb up a tree well, so it can't be released, it still has the desire. It's still a wild being. It still needs and desires its freedom. It does not want to be caged. They're stressed in cages. They're stressed from noises. They don't want to be around us. They should not be around us. And so the only humane thing to do, even if it could survive in captivity, the only humane thing to do, and really by law, is we are expected as rehabbers to humanely euthanize. And I mean humanely. I don't mean in any other way. I know that the best way to do it is to put the animal under a little gas to put it to sleep. I mean, to put it just so that it goes to sleep, and then then it goes into sort of like an ether state where it's calm, and sort of like if you were put under before you were going in an operation. And then we would give it, the gas, which puts it to sleep. And then that's really the humane thing to do, I'm sorry to say. But sometimes it's necessary. I mean, I've seen animals who are not releasable, who were kept in cages, and it's painful to watch them. They're very unhappy. So sorry about that answer, but that's the answer. The other answer is, depending on the type of animal that you have, the kind of release you do depends on the kind of animal you have. So for example, opossums do not stay with their parents, with their mother, for very long. Once they are ready to go, once they're finished milking, basically, they kind of just drop off and go their own way. She's not really teaching them anything. So if we have a baby opossum, we don't have to do anything other than find a place where it's a good place to release her, and we can release her, hopefully away from any dangers. Squirrels, on the other hand, are very different, right? So squirrels learn everything from their parents, right? They learn what to eat, what not to eat, where to go, how to build it. I mean, they just learn a lot from their mothers. They also learn the territory. They also have to understand, what's around them. And so if you want to release a squirrel, let's say you get a baby squirrel, which I've had so many of. You get baby squirrels, you're ready to release them. You can't just throw them out into a wooded area and say, gee, have a nice life. They don't know where they are. They don't know what to do. They don't know where the tree, they have to acclimate. So we have places where we can take them where they have what we call soft releases, which I mentioned. Cages would be set up. The animal can go in and out. When it can come back for food, it will eventually acclimate to its new environment. It will become familiar with its territory. It will create its own territory, and that's the way to do it. By the way, that's what biologists do in any release that they do, whether you're reintroducing wolves to an area or bobcats, which they've done, or lynx. You have to make sure that that animal is soft released. Otherwise, it doesn't know where it is. And plus, there are other animals of the same species that have those territories. So you have to just take all those things into consideration.
Yeah, those are great. Those are some really important points.
And if it's a bird, by the way, like at the Wild Bird Fund, if we can, or if they can, they like to release, if it's an adult bird, they like to release it as close to its original territory as possible, because they already have a territory. If we get the bird as a young bird, it's not that important because they don't have a territory yet. It's most important that we release them regardless of where we are, in an area that's away from glass, away from danger. And that's the main challenge.
Yeah, definitely. So we have someone that would like to actually come on and ask you personally their question. So I'm going to ask John, who has their hand raised. Go ahead and ask Michelle your question.
Hi, John.
Thanks, Christina. Hi, Michelle. Thanks so much for the talk. It's been great, very informative. I just had two little questions about like potential threats to birds specifically, and I was wondering what you thought. One of them is, it seems to me lately, it's been like very popular on social media to like hand feed wild birds and try to get that like filmed, especially in places like Central Park or the public parks. And I guess I worry that like that's just a bad idea, like for spreading disease or somehow hurting the wild birds. And I was wondering what you thought about that.
It's a bad idea.
It's a bad idea, right?
It's a bad idea, but the reason it's a bad idea is not necessarily because it will spread disease, although if you have a diseased bird that you're feeding and then they congregate, so many of the diseases are spread bird by bird through a common food source, and they're congregating. So, but it's really
That's a good way to say it.
Yeah, but the reason that it's a bad idea is because then the birds become used to humans. So some people would say, so what? So they become used to humans. Well, not all humans are kind to animals, and there are those humans who have bad intentions. And so if you have an animal that is used to a human, used to coming close to a human, and that particular human or a particular human wants to do it harm, you're creating the perfect storm for that. So we really want to keep our wildlife wild. It's as simple as that.
Thank you. The other one's a little bit of a funny one, but I was trying to figure this out. I know that with like some...
John, let me just say one more thing.
Sure.
I would imagine that everybody has gone to a duck pond. You see the ducks, you see the geese, and you throw them bread. No bread. So I want to make it really clear, you shouldn't be feeding the ducks because at all, even though it's very tempting, but never feed them bread for a lot of reasons. But the most important reason, everybody, that you don't want to feed the geese and the ducks any kind of bread is because it is like candy, and it has no nutritional value for them. They fill up on these carbohydrates. They become used to eating it from humans, and then they don't eat the food that they need, and it actually causes deformities. It causes bone deformities where and structural deformities where their wings, it's called an angel wing. And so instead of their wings developing properly, their wings develop sort of twisted, and they cannot fly, they cannot fend for themselves. So if you are absolutely hell-bent on feeding birds, make sure that you are feeding them the proper food, but it is better not to, and definitely never bread. Okay.
Copy.
John, you had another question.
Yeah, just another similar one. This one's a little funny though, but I was trying to figure out, because I was reading that some birds, like birds do have a sense of smell. And a lot of times, I was reading this one article that suggested that they can use it for like, for migrating or finding their path. And I just know that some more nuanced like hotels, especially around the city, they'll pump these like VOCs, like these tree oils, and like, that you can smell them outside, you can almost taste them. And I worry that with these glass buildings pumping these tree oils, that it's like even more of this is a forest and I'm gonna fly into this forest. I was wondering what you thought if the smell as well, like smell pollution could be drawing these birds into the glass.
I don't think so, but it's a really interesting comment. So birds do have a sense of smell, not all of them, and not all of them have a good sense of smell. Some have better sense of smell than others. I don't think that would be drawing them in. Generally, what draws the birds into the windows is either light, because they're drawn to light. So at night, birds migrate at night generally, or very early in the morning. And if the lights are still on in buildings, it confuses the birds and they fly towards the light. The other thing that brings them towards the windows really is the reflection, or the fact that they're so clean, they don't see the glass, they just fly right through. Those are the main problems. But I think it's a very interesting thought, and it's something that can look into. I did not know that they do that, but we can find out. But I don't believe that that's a problem. But I don't know for sure because I've never heard of that. What I would say, John, is that knowing what you now know about these terrible collisions, and everybody else here too, I would really encourage you to talk to your building managers, because most of the collisions, according to the American Bird Conservancy and the Audubon Society, most of these collisions are occurring within the first 3 stories. Certainly they occur higher up as well, but the legislation that the city just passed for all new construction is that the first 3 floors of any new structure have to be bird safe glass. So I would really encourage you to talk to your building managers to maybe do something in the, for the lobbies and stuff during migration season. And I'm happy to talk to you more about that as well. Thank you, John.
Great questions, John. And I guess you heard it here first. It's socially acceptable to leave your windows dirty. Leave them dirty and you'll actually be doing the birds a service, right? So we're running, we've been here for a while. I know people have places to go. So we're going to wrap up with just one last question. Someone wants to know, they noticed that the minimum age on the DEC website for the Class 1 rehabilitator license is 16 years old. Would you recommend a 16-year-old take the exam, or do you think that is too young?
Definitely not too young. Absolutely take it. I encourage my students to take it. I teach high school students in the summers at Columbia University, and I encourage them all, if they're interested, to start now. And then once you take the test, even before you take the test, if you're really interested, once COVID sort of normalizes us a little bit, I would really encourage you to reach out to any of the rehabbers, myself included, Wild Bird Fund. They do internships. You can be a volunteer. You can learn the skills. There's other rehabs in Westchester. I mean, I would really encourage you to do it as young as possible, because, and a lot of the people actually that have volunteered at Wild Bird Fund, by the way, young high school students who did internships there through their schools and whatnot, ended up getting jobs and now work as staff at the Wild Bird Fund. So, and then have gone on to other things as well. And some have gone on to veterinary school. Wonderful to start at 16. I would definitely encourage you to do so.
Great. All right. So any teens that are listening, there are opportunities here that you can start getting experience and getting involved now. I want to thank you so much, Michelle, for joining us tonight and just sharing your wealth of knowledge and expertise and stories about your experiences with us. I think that sometimes these wildlife rehabbers do a thankless job. And I know you put a lot of your heart and soul and time into this.
Well, I want to say, Christina, it's never thankless, because when you can save a life, or when you see those little eyes open and look at you, there's nothing thankless about it. It is the most rewarding and wonderful. Yes, thankless in the sense that you don't get paid for it, but it is the most wonderful, really wonderful feeling you almost have an immediate bond, with all these animals. And the finders and the rescuers like yourselves, I cannot tell you how many people call me and say, how is so-and-so doing? How is she doing? I've been so worried about her. Tell me about her progress. They want to know, and you would want to know too. So thank you, Christina, but it is really a wonderful thing. And I hope everybody continues to learn how they can be better stewards of the environment, and maybe take the test and join us in the rehab community. It would be wonderful.
Well said. Before we leave, just want to mention a few things about the Brooklyn Bridge Park Conservancy. For those of you that this is your first time joining us, we're doing these webinars once a month. We also have a YouTube page, as I mentioned earlier. The link has been put in the chat box. please subscribe so that you know when we're doing more events like this. You can also watch recordings of our past webinars. We are doing monthly nature themes where we create a bunch of at-home learning activities for families. We do virtual events like this and even some in-park events. So go to brooklynbridgepark.org to learn more about all of the things that we are currently offering in regards to environmental education. I think with that, I'm going to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you again to Michelle, and I hope you guys all have a wonderful evening.
Thank you again. It was my pleasure.
All right.